The night begins like a breath held too long. A horizon of ember light fades behind broken hills, and somewhere beyond the darkness lie the bones of cities that once called the stars by name. Listen, the wind is full of their pulse. It hums across deserts, climbs the ruins of walls, and drifts through doorways that have forgotten what voices sound like. Tonight, we go out to find those voices again. Civilization doesn't vanish in thunder, it exhales. First, the laughter in courtyards dims. Then the chisels fall silent, and finally, even the dust forgets where it came from. Yet, the ground remembers. Every inch of earth is a library, every shard a sentence, every buried mosaic a thought whispered forward through time. We are standing over that whisper. Tonight, listening. Think of them, the first dreamers of permanence, farmers who tethered rivers to furrows, masons who used the sun as a measurement, women whose hands pressed clay and left fingerprints you could still match to your own. They weren't building ruins, they were building futures. But the future is never a house we can keep. It rents us briefly, and then moves on. Our journey begins where memory and imagination trade shapes. Together, we'll walk on rooftops older than writing, touch wells that once mirrored the Indus moon, and climb the stairs of a palace painted with dolphins and bulls. We'll pass through lion gates that no army could silence, kneel by rivers that raised stone kings from mud, and enter canyons where entire empires learned to speak to water. Our journey will end in forests that wrote calendars in the sky, and then forgot them under a blanket of vines. Every step we take is a pulse of time reversed. The ground beneath our feet is not dead. It's waiting. Somewhere below, a child's bead of jade still catches light that last shone 5,000 years ago. Somewhere, a pot sealed for a journey never taken sits unopened, its grains still fragrant in the dark. Somewhere, the bones of a scribe rest beside a stylus that outlived the kingdom he served. You see, the earth does not bury its archives. But before we can read these archives, we must listen. The silence of vanished worlds isn't empty, it's layered. Close your eyes for a moment. Can you hear the distant rhythm of pestles grinding grain on the Anatolian plain? Can you smell the damp of new-cut canals in the Indus Valley? Or feel the salt wind from Crete carrying songs of trade? Can you taste the dust of Aegean, where treaties outlasted kings? Or sense the heavy breath of jungles where the Maya counted centuries by heartbeat and eclipse? Each silence carries its own unique timbre of ash, clay, bronze, or rain. What unites all these lost worlds isn't just their grandeur, it's their risk. Every civilization we will meet believed it had found the formula for forever. A perfect drain, a perfect law, a perfect god, a perfect stone. And every one of them was wrong in the same magnificent way. They mistook mastery for immunity. They built an order so tight that when chaos finally came, it needed only one loose thread to unravel the entire cloth. Tonight, we chase that thread. We'll see how the first cities rose not from war, but from shared need. We'll discover how comfort bred ceremony, how ceremony birthed power, and how power, once enthroned, began to crave the impossible, complete control over nature itself. They tried to command the water and the sky, the seasons and the souls of their people. For a time, they succeeded until they didn't. Still, this is not a eulogy. Each ruin is also a seed. The obsidian blades of the Olmec gleam in the jade of the Maya. The water laws of Petra whisper in the canets of Arabia. The geometry of Indus drains echoes in the streets of our modern towns. Time does not erase, it translates. Our task is to learn that ancient language again. So, take a deep breath. Feel the imaginary dust of ages settle on your skin. Ahead of us lies a plain baked as hard as iron, where a cluster of houses without doors hums with the first heartbeat of city life. Its people walked their roofs like streets, buried their dead under their own hearths, and painted walls with bulls that charge forever. In this place, there were no kings, no soldiers, only the courage to stay. This is Hugh, and it is where the story of us, the story of humans as builders, truly begins. Thank you for joining me on this first step. If you're as fascinated by these echoes of the past as I am, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of our journey. See you then. Imagine a world without kings, without streets, a world before the very idea of a city even existed. Picture a vast, open plain in what is now modern-day Turkey. Thousands of years ago, a group of people stood here on the Anatolian plain and made a revolutionary choice not to wander, but to stay. This is the story of Çatalhöyük, one of the first human settlements, a place where civilization itself learned how to live together. They chose a spot where rivers curved gently through tall reeds, a perfect place to plant the first seeds. And here, they built their homes, but not in any way we would recognize. The houses were built shoulder to shoulder, walls pressed so tightly together they looked like a single, massive structure. There were no streets to divide them, no grand temples or palaces towering over the rest. Every house touched another, and every roof was a shared road. Can you imagine it? Children would run across this vast expanse of rooftops, as if they were walking on the sky itself. You'd see them balancing water jars, their laughter echoing between homes as they moved from one family's roof to another. The air itself was thick with life, the smell of freshly baked bread, the rhythmic sound of grain being ground between heavy stones, and the sight of smoke curling upwards from countless roof holes. These holes weren't just chimneys, they were also the doors. To get into your home, you wouldn't walk through a door in a wall. You would climb down a ladder from the roof. At the end of the day, as dusk settled over the plain, families would climb back up to those same rooftops. This was their public square, their meeting place. They would talk, mend tools, share stories, and dream under the stars. The roof was the heart of their community. Inside their homes, their world was alive with color and breath. The walls weren't bare, they were canvases. Archaeologists have found them painted a deep, powerful red, with murals of charging bulls and soaring white vultures. And everywhere, you find handprints pressed into the wet plaster signatures of life, saying, "I was here, I lived." It's an incredibly personal touch, a direct connection to these ancient people, and their connection to family, to their ancestors, was just as profound. Beneath the platforms where they slept, they buried their dead. The bones of their loved ones lay right under the floorboards, a constant presence. The past and the present were literally breathing the same air. This practice tells us so much about their worldview that life and death, past and future, were all part of a single, continuous cycle. What's truly astonishing about Çatalhöyük is what it lacked. There were no kings or queens, no slaves. We find no evidence of a ruling class, no grand palaces or fortresses. There weren't even any prisons. So, where did power come from? It came from the rhythm of their shared survival. It was a society built on cooperation. Families would replaster their walls together. They feasted together. After a fire or a flood, they rebuilt together. In a way, the city itself was their leader, single, living organism made of 1,000 rooms, all with one shared purpose: to endure together. This idea is so radical, even today. It was a city that functioned like a single body, with each house a vital cell. Their spirituality was woven into the fabric of their daily lives. They worshipped through the act of making. Archaeologists have unearthed countless small clay figures of goddesses, women with broad hips and calm, serene faces. These were likely guardians of the home, symbols of fertility and the abundance of food. They weren't worshipped in massive temples, but held in the hand, kept close in the home. They also carved fierce leopard heads, placing them in the walls to watch over doorways, perhaps as protectors, and they hung the massive horns of wild bulls on their walls, powerful symbols of strength and the wild world outside. Every tool they made, every object they crafted, was sacred because it was part of the great cycle of life and survival. A simple stone axe wasn't just a tool, it was a promise of warmth, food and security. And Çatalhöyük was not isolated. It was a hub, a center of trade and ideas. A steady flow of goods moved like breath between distant valleys. From the east came obsidian, a volcanic glass as black and sharp as frozen lightning. It was prized for making incredibly sharp blades and tools. From the surrounding plains came salt and animal hides. Each trade wasn't just about goods, it carried news, new ideas, and perhaps even new songs and stories. With each passing generation, the settlement grew. As old houses fell into disuse, they were filled in, and new ones were built directly on top. Over hundreds of years, this created a large mound, a man-made hill rising from the plain. Çatalhöyük became a living tower built of memory, layer upon layer of human history. It was a physical testament to their success, their endurance. But such extreme closeness, the very thing that made them strong, also held a dangerous comfort. When every home stands wall to wall, a single spark can become a raging inferno. We see evidence of fires in the archaeological record. A fire could leap from roof to roof, devouring the very walls that were meant to keep them safe. And what about sickness? In such a crowded environment, illness could spread like wildfire, moving from one family to the next through the shared air and close contact. And then there was the question of fairness. Over time, some families likely had more grain stored away than others. Some were more fortunate in the hunt. In the small cracks between the clay walls, jealousy and inequality began to find a place. The perfect equality they may have started with began to thin, like old plaster after too many seasons. And then the fires came again. Whether they were accidents or acts of anger, we'll never truly know. But flames climbed the ladders. They leaped across the rooftops. They devoured the homes that had kept generations safe. When the smoke cleared and a new morning dawned, the survivors gathered what little they had left. Perhaps a single jar of grain, a sturdy stone blade, a small goddess figurine, still warm from the heat of the fire. And they walked away. The archaeological record shows that, after nearly 2,000 years, the site was abandoned. They walked away from the mound of their ancestors, and they didn't look back. But the idea of Cthulhu, the grand experiment in living, walked with them. The idea that people could live together as one body, linked by walls, by shared work, and by collective memory, did not die. The idea that community itself could be sacred, that was their true legacy. Every city that came after, from the great cities of Mesopotamia, like Ur to Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley to Rome, and all the way to the sprawling metropolises of today, like London or New York, is in some small way a reflection of that first brave decision made on the Anatolian plain, the decision to stay, to build, and to belong. Today, if you visit the mound of Cthulhu, it's a quiet place. The wind moves over the earth, and some say it sounds like a soft breath rising from below. In the excavated rooms, the painted bullheads still stare out from the fading plaster. The rooftops that once teemed with life are gone, but you can almost feel the heartbeat of the city that remains. This is where civilization first learned to live together, and it is also where we first learned how easily that togetherness can burn. It's a powerful lesson, one that echoes from the past and is more relevant today than ever. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about our incredible shared past. See you in the next video. Imagine a city with no streets, a city where you walked on rooftops, stepping from your neighbor's roof to your own as if strolling through a park. A city where doors were in the ceiling and you climbed down a ladder to enter your home. This wasn't a fantasy. This was Cthulhu, one of the world's first cities, born nearly 9,000 years ago in what is now Turkey. In its golden age, this city was a marvel of community. Closeness was comfort. You could call out your neighbor's name and hear laughter answer from 3 houses away. Life was warm, crowded, alive. A honeycomb of mud brick houses, all packed together, sharing walls. Below the floors, a sacred tradition, the dead were buried right there, under the living, keeping generations bound together in a single, continuous story. Life and death, past and present, all under one roof. The rooftops were the city's open sky, its public square. This is where life happened in the open air, grinding grain, weaving baskets, sharing stories under the sun. It was a radical experiment in human living, a testament to what we could build when we chose unity over isolation. But even the most perfect community has its limits. Comfort has a way of tightening its grip until breath becomes thin. Over hundreds of years, Cthulhu began to press in on itself. The settlement, built on its own history, grew into a massive mound. As new houses were built on top of old ones, walls grew closer, rooms smaller, and ceilings lower. The air inside thickened with the smell of ash, sweat, and clay. Fireplaces smoked without a breeze to pull the fumes away. The constant cough of a child, the wheezing breath of an elder, these became the city's background noise. What had once been a comforting embrace began to feel like confinement. The rooftops, once the heart of the community, became the only escape. But up there, something new began to float on the wind along with the dust and gossip. Small differences, once invisible, started to matter. In the beginning, every house was the same shape, the same size, the same shared hope. But now, some grew larger. Some floors shone with fresh layers of plaster while others cracked and wore thin. In one home, a wall glowed with a vibrant mural of bulls and hunters painted in rich ochre. Next door, the paint flaked like old skin. Inequality had arrived, not with swords or kings, but quietly with a coat of paint, a slightly larger room, a better storage pot. Meanwhile, the world outside was calling. Trade routes stretched farther than ever before, bringing obsidian blades from distant mountains and seashells from faraway coasts. Traders returned with more than just goods. They brought stories, tales of other valleys, other villages, other ways of life. A restlessness began to stir. The people of Cthulhu had mastered survival in their crowded home, but now they began to hunger for something more, for difference, for space, for a horizon that wasn't just another rooftop. Living in Cthulhu meant living on the shoulders of your ancestors, quite literally. Generations were layered beneath the floors, a mountain of memory holding up the present. But after so many seasons, perhaps that weight became too heavy to bear. The very closeness that had been their strength became their vulnerability. Disease found a perfect home in the packed, smoky rooms, with shared water jars and swarming flies. Sickness could spread like wildfire. The rhythm of life, the same air, the same fire, the same hand-to-mouth existence began to feel less like a steady pulse and more like a trap. The dream of unity was trembling under the weight of its own success. And so, they began to leave. It wasn't a sudden exodus, not a panicked flight. At first, it was just a few families. Farmers who longed for open fields and cleaner wind. They built small, separate houses farther down the river, carving new hearths where they could finally breathe again. Their neighbors watched them go. Many stayed behind, patching the cracking walls, replastering the floors, holding on to the world they knew, pretending nothing had changed. But the cracks were showing not just in the walls, but in the very foundation of their society. Then came the final blow, a devastating drought. The river, the lifeblood of the city, shrank into its bed. The fertile earth turned to dust, and the fields of wheat and barley withered under a relentless sun. Without water, mud brick turns back into the earth it came from. Hunger became the city's second fire, and this one no ritual or feast could extinguish. The shared storage bins, once a symbol of their collective strength, were now empty. The city that had thrived for over 1,000 years was starving. Archaeologists who would unearth the city millennia later found the silent evidence of this final chapter. They found floors that had been hurriedly patched one last time. They found storage bins scraped clean. And in some houses, they found walls that had been burned as if purified in a final ritual farewell. It wasn't an act of destruction but of closure, a careful, deliberate goodbye to the place that had been their world. The people of Cthulhu didn't just vanish. They dispersed. They packed the idea of home onto their backs and carried it with them. They took their knowledge how to shape clay, how to orient a house to the rising sun, and the belief that memory belongs under your feet. They moved on, seeking new beginnings, founding new, smaller villages where they could start again. And as they left, the great mound fell silent. The wind and rain began their slow work, smoothing its sharp edges, softening its shape. Grasses and wildflowers took root where smoke once rose. For thousands of years, the city slept, a hill made not by nature, but by stubborn, brilliant, human hope. But here's the most incredible part. Something of Cthulhu never died. Its legacy, its pattern of living, echoes through history. Think of the packed lanes of ancient Rome, the bustling courtyards of medieval cities, or even the high-rise apartment blocks we live in today. We are still living in Cthulhu's shadow. We are still building upward, still crowding together, still searching for that delicate balance between community and independence, between belonging and the simple need for a deep breath of fresh air. The story of Cthulhu began as a miracle of unity and ended as a profound lesson in limits. It teaches us that even the most beautiful dream, when held too tightly, must eventually be let go. Today, When the wind crosses that silent mound in Turkey, it whispers through dust and cracked clay. It doesn't speak in words, but in memory, a message left for us to find. We were here. We lived together. We built something beautiful. And when it grew too heavy to carry, we set it down carefully, so that you, thousands of years later, could find it again. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from our incredible human past. See you next time. Imagine a civilization born between two great rivers, the Indus and the long-lost Saraswati. A world built not with swords or kings, but with an almost sacred sense of order. They raised cities so precise they feel like they were drawn with a compass and a dream. Welcome to the Indus Valley, a realm of 1,000 towns stretching from the Himalayas to the Arabian Sea. At its heart stood Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. Their names might mean Mound of the Dead and River City, but in their time, they were alive with purpose. Picture this, streets crossing at perfect right angles, every single house oriented to catch the wind. Every brick, baked to a perfect red, was the exact same size, the exact same ratio. Beneath the ground, a network of drains, sealed with stone slabs, was so brilliantly engineered that they could still function today. Look around these ancient cities. You won't find towering palaces or grand, boastful tombs for kings. What you find is balance everywhere. This was a civilization that seemed to worship order itself. As the sun rose, the city awoke not to chaos but to rhythm. You'd hear the steady turn of the potter's wheel, the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of bronze-smiths hammering delicate ornaments until they sang. Women carried water from wells so deep they felt ancient. Even then, in courtyards where white plaster shone like salt in the morning light, children played. Merchants with their tiny, precise stone scales weighed out shimmering carnelian beads, and traders who had traveled from distant Mesopotamia and beyond stood in awe. Every shop, every house, every street followed the same quiet, undeniable logic. There were no statues of kings here, no carvings boasting of conquest. Power wasn't held by a person, it lived in the pattern of the city itself. Even the largest buildings, the massive warehouses, the public baths, the vast granaries belonged to everyone. The Great Bath, with its steps descending into still, clear water, wasn't just for washing. It was a place of communal cleansing, of shared ritual. It wasn't a temple to gods as we know them, but a temple to discipline the shared belief that purity was a practice for the entire community. Their language, a mystery to this day, glimmers on tiny seals of soapstone. Each one is no bigger than your thumb, carved with elegant symbols, a fish, a tree, a one-horned beast, a figure with arms raised in what looks like worship. Though we can't read their words, these seals still speak. They tell of merchants and their faith, of identity and trade. They tell of a people who believed that precision was a form of peace, and trade was the invisible thread that stitched their world together. Obsidian from the highlands, brilliant blue lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, gleaming shells from the Arabian coast. They mined copper from Rajasthan and gold from Gujarat, from the docks of Lothal city with a man-made harbour, and waterfront warehouses their ships set sail, carrying the wealth of the Indus to the great cities of Sumer and beyond. Archaeologists have found their seals in Sumerian ruins, their beads in the graves of foreign kings. Their sense of order was admired and even imitated. But the real wonder isn't what they traded, it's in how they lived. Think about it. Nearly every home had its own dedicated bathing room and a covered drain. Connecting it to the city's sewer system, these weren't temporary structures. They were built to last for generations. The streets were wide enough for 2 ox carts to pass, yet narrow enough to provide constant shade from the harsh sun. The city was designed to breathe, and when the great Indus River flooded, as it often did, the city's drains would whisper the water away, protecting the homes of its citizens. In this quiet precision lay something radical. While other civilizations built power through spectacle and display, the Indus people built it through design. No great armies carved their victories into stone, yet their influence commanded half a continent. No priests shouted dogma from towering temples, yet faith and ritual filled every well, every home, every grain jar. Perhaps their god was water itself, life's oldest and most essential mirror. Imagine walking through Mohenjo-Daro in its prime. You pass down a straight avenue of baked brick, feeling the cool shade of the high walls on both sides. You see children splashing at a public cistern. Somewhere, a trader seals a crate with wet clay and presses his personal mark into it: a bull, a fish, a star. The sound of a distant hammer fades into the collective hum of thousands of people living and working in harmony. There are no guards on the corners, no throne room to be seen. There is only shared purpose. They had mastered something incredibly rare: order without oppression. A harmony that made human life feel stable, predictable, almost timeless. But time, as always, is listening. The world began to change. The monsoon rains, which had once arrived with perfect rhythm, started to falter. The great rivers, the lifelines of the cities, began to change their course, pulling away from the civilizations they had nurtured. Crops withered in the fields. The once pristine drains started to clog with silt. The streets began to crack. In some homes, you see bricks being reused from older, crumbling walls acquired. Desperate sign of struggle. And still, the people endured. They patched their walls, they rebuilt their homes. They kept hoping for the rains to return to their ancient patterns. But the great rivers do not wait for hope. They continued to shift eastward, and the civilization followed as far as it could, their settlements becoming smaller, more scattered. The workshops fell silent. The hum of the marketplace faded into the whistle of the wind. By the time strangers arrived centuries later, they found only the bones of this magnificent civilization. The Indus people didn't fall in a blaze of glory or a clash of armies. They simply ebbed away. Like the tide leaving the shore, they withdrew without noise, leaving behind the powerful pattern of their thought, a pattern so strong. It continues to guide the cities we build today. When you walk down the straight streets of any modern city, when clean water runs beneath your feet in hidden pipes, when a grid system keeps the chaos of urban life in check, you are walking in the legacy of the Indus. They built the blueprint of civilization itself, and then, with quiet grace, they vanished. Their silence is not a story of failure. It is a profound mystery. They spoke to us not through words, but through design. And design is the one language that time itself cannot erase. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories from our incredible shared past. See you next time. History often tells us that great civilizations end with a bang, with the clash of armies, the thunder of conquest, and walls collapsing in flame. But what if one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known didn't fall? What if it simply faded away? This is the story of the Indus Valley civilization, and its ending is unlike any you've ever heard. The end did not come with war. It began, as all life did for them, with the river. The mighty Indus, proud and unpredictable, had always been the heartbeat of their world, a giver of life and a taker. But one day, the rhythm began to shift. The Saraswati, their sister river, started to dry into a whisper, its channels slowly choking with sand. The monsoons, once as reliable as clockwork, grew timid. Rain that used to nourish the fields now only teased them with false promises, arriving too late. Or not at all. Imagine the scene: endless fields of grain withering under a relentless sun. The rich, dark mud cracking into a mosaic of drought. The wells, dug with such precision, sinking lower and lower each season. And the drains, those incredible, perfectly engineered veins running beneath the city, ran empty. Their hollow echo a mockery of the genius that built them. At first, the people adapted. This was a civilization of builders, of engineers, of survivors. They had weathered devastating floods and droughts before. They dug their wells deeper, they moved their fields, they replastered their walls. But the rivers were unforgiving. They kept wandering farther and farther away, and the very lungs of the cities began to collapse. Without water, even perfection turns to dust. In the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, one of the civilization's greatest cities, archaeologists later found strange signs of this struggle. They found floors repaired over and over again, drains rebuilt, but smaller this time. They found a great bath, once a center of public life, abandoned and filled with trash. It's as if the people were living with one foot already outside the door, holding on, but preparing for the inevitable. The lifeblood of the city was draining away. And not just the water. Workshops fell silent. The kilns that once fired millions of identical bricks grew cold. A city of engineers, a people obsessed with order and symmetry, slowly forgot the luxury of perfection. Their world was built not just on water, but on trade. The great port city of Lothal, with its remarkable dockyards, saw its ships waiting for cargo that never arrived. The beautiful carnelian beads, once traded as far as Mesopotamia, now dulled in the sun. Merchants looked to the west and saw new powers rising, new trade routes that no longer needed them. The Indus world was built on a network of exchange, and when the rivers broke their promise, so did the markets. Still, they held on. This was not a people who believed in sudden, dramatic endings. For centuries, their entire culture was about enduring, about adjusting quietly. They rebuilt, they reused, they shifted. As the great cities declined, new villages sprouted up to the north and east. Small communities clung to the old ways. You could still see it in their habits. Bricks still made in that perfect 1:2 ratio. Streets still oriented to catch the wind. Their faith still centered on the life-giving power of water, even when there was so little of it left to bless. And then, slowly, came the silence, not the silence of death, but the silence that creeps over generations, the kind that settles in so completely that no one remembers the names of the streets, or what the strange symbols on the seals once meant. A potter's wheel stops spinning. A market stall goes unclaimed. A doorway collapses and is never rebuilt. One by one, the sounds of a living city, the chatter, the commerce, the children's laughter faded. Little by little, the hum that had held 1,000,000 people together thinned, until it was nothing but the wind. By the time the last families packed their belongings and walked away, Mohenjo-daro must have looked like an empty hive. The walls were still standing, the streets were still straight, but there were no footsteps echoing between them, just the sound of cows grazing where children once played, bats hanging from the ceilings of the great bath, and dust gathering in the wells that once reflected a clear, blue sky. When explorers uncovered the city thousands of years later, its bones were so clean, so perfectly symmetrical, that they thought it must have been abandoned yesterday. But it wasn't a sudden catastrophe. It was time, patiently doing its work. It seems erosion does not rush the masterpieces it loves. The Indus didn't fall to pride or violence. It fell to something much gentler, the slow, quiet erosion of certainty. When your entire world is built on the promise of water, and one day the water simply walks away, no wall you build can hold your civilization together. And yet, nothing truly ended. People moved, they migrated east. Toward the fertile plains of the Ganges River, they carried with them seeds, tools, and something much more powerful, their ideas. The memory of their cities was woven into the fabric of their descendants, the way they built, the way they measured, the way they prioritized cleanliness and community. These habits became the grammar of the civilizations that followed. The world did not lose the Indus, it inherited it. Today, when you open a tap and clean water flows out, when you walk down a clean, gridded city street, when your town is designed to breathe with water systems below and open sky above, you are living inside their imagination. Their obsession with precision became our modern instinct. Their silence became our foundation. If you ever visit the ruins of Mohenjo-daro at dusk, you'll see the bricks glow a warm red in the last light of the sun. The streets are still straight. The great bath still waits for the water that will never return. And the wind sighs softly through the empty doorways as if the city is dreaming that someday someone will come back to finish what it started. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more explorations into the forgotten corners of history. See you in the next one. Imagine an island born from blue sea and sharp wind, a place that learned to dance with the tides. This wasn't just land, it was a bridge between continents, a crossroads for gods and sailors. This was Crete, and for 1,000 years, it was the heart of a civilization that ruled not by conquest, but by beauty. They were the Minoans, while mighty empires on the mainland were busy building massive walls and fortresses. The people of Crete built open-air courtyards, where others carved thrones of stone to display their power. The Minoans carved light itself into their homes. Their strength wasn't measured in armies, but in rhythm, in the effortless, graceful way they seemed to live. At the center of their world stood Knossos. It wasn't a fortress, it was a palace that spread out like a vibrant, living maze of color and air. Imagine buildings climbing 3, 4, even 5 stories high, with terraces and grand stairways all wrapping around sun-drenched central courts. The columns, famously painted in striking reds and blacks, were unique. They tapered upwards, like stylized flames reaching for the sky. This wasn't just architecture, it was an engineering marvel. Light streamed into the deepest rooms through cleverly designed light wells and shafts. Water, the lifeblood of any city, flowed through a complex network of terracotta pipes with a sophistication that feels almost modern. Even in the Bronze Age, the Minoans had advanced plumbing, efficient drainage systems, and fountains that bubbled with fresh, running water. This was civilization defined not as a defense against the world, but as a deep, profound comfort within it. Every corridor in Knossos seemed to lead to another wonder. You might turn a corner and find yourself in vast storerooms, where enormous jars some taller than a grown man stood in neat rows. They were filled with the riches of the island, fragrant olive oil, golden grain, deep red wine, and sweet honey. This wasn't just storage. It was a testament to an island that had transformed trade into a high art form. The Minoans understood that wealth wasn't just about hoarding gold. It was about the abundance of life itself. But the true soul of the palace was on its walls. Brilliant frescoes, painted on wet plaster, captured the spirit of Minoan life in vivid detail. You'd see athletic young men, frozen in midair as they vaulted gracefully over the backs of charging bulls. You'd see elegant women with elaborate, curling hairstyles, their shoulders bare, chatting in groups with an air of confidence and ease. And everywhere, you'd see nature. Dolphins leap through dreamlike blue seas, birds flit among lilies and griffins. Mythical guardians sit peacefully in fields of flowers. What's striking is what you don't see. There are no scenes of battle, no long lines of conquered peoples bowing before a king, no glorification of war or violence. The art of the Minoans is a celebration of movement, color, and grace. It's a window into a culture that valued life, ritual, and beauty above all else. This wasn't a society driven by fear. It was a society inspired by joy. Their spiritual world was just as unique. The Minoans worshipped the raw power of the earth and the endless mystery of the sea. They revered the pulse of life that connected the two. Their gods didn't wield thunderbolts or carry weapons of war. In fact, their most powerful deities were often female. The famous snake goddess figurine, found at Knossos, shows a woman holding serpents in her outstretched hands, powerful symbols of life, death, and rebirth. Their worship wasn't confined to grand temples. They practiced their faith in nature. On the highest mountain peaks, they lit sacred fires, sending their prayers up to the sky. In the dark, silent depths of caves, they poured libations of milk and wine directly into the earth, honoring its fertility. For the Minoans, faith wasn't a commanding voice from above. It was a quiet whisper that reminded them that everything alive, from the smallest flower to the greatest bull, was sacred. Yet, for all their focus on inner peace and beauty, the Minoans were not isolated. Far from it. They were the first true masters of the Mediterranean Sea. Their sleek, swift ships, powered by sail and oar, connected them to the wider world. They sailed east to the ancient kingdom of Egypt and west all the way to Sicily. They were the undisputed logistical geniuses of their time. They created a vast and prosperous trade network. The fragrant olive oil and beautifully crafted pottery of Crete were in high demand across the ancient world. In return, Minoan ships came back laden with gold from Egypt, copper from Cyprus, and ivory from the Near East. But they brought back more than just precious goods. They brought back stories, new ideas, music, and even gods with different names. For the Minoans, the sea was never a border, it was their highway, their connection to humanity. They mastered the waves so completely that later Greek writers, looking back in awe, gave them a special name, the thalassocracy, which means the rule of the sea. When storms brewed, their expertly designed ships were flexible enough to bend with the waves rather than break against them. While other empires were forging swords, the Minoans were perfecting their sails. Their power was based on movement, connection, and control of the world's most important trade routes. Try to picture the island at its peak, around 1700 BCE. See the sunlit terraces of Knossos bustling with activity. Hear the sounds of a thriving marketplace in a nearby town, filled with goods and languages from across the sea. Watch priests and priestesses dressed in fine white linen walk serenely beneath the brightly painted colonnades. And beyond the palace, see the lush vineyards climbing the rolling hills and the harbor glittering with ships, their sails like the scales of some great silver creature. Everywhere, there's a sense of life in motion. The music of flutes and lyres drifts on the breeze, mixed with laughter and the sound of dancing feet on smooth, polished stone floors. This was a kingdom where joy was the foundation of social order, and where that order was seen as a reflection of the divine. It was, in many ways, a paradise. But even in paradise, the earth keeps its own, more ancient calendar. Deep beneath the waves, just 100 kilometers north of Crete, a force of unimaginable power was stirring. A sleeping giant, a massive volcano, was slowly waking from its slumber. Its name was Thera, and it was watching. The golden age of the Minoans was about to face a power far greater than any king or empire. The raw, untamable power of the planet itself. The dance was about to come to a sudden, violent end. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey back in time. If you were as captivated by the Minoan world as we are, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from the ancient world. We'd love to have you with us for the next adventure. Imagine an island civilization so advanced, so artistic, it felt like a paradise on earth. This was Minoan Crete, a world ruled not by walls and weapons, but by grace and beauty. For centuries, they danced, they traded, they painted magnificent frescoes of leaping dolphins and vibrant festivals. They were masters of the sea. Their palaces at Knossos and Phaistos centers of a culture that seemed blessed by the gods. But even paradise must answer to the earth. North of Crete, beneath the turquoise Aegean, a mountain called Thera began to stir. It started with whispers, tremors that rattled pots on shelves and sent ripples through water jars. Priests exchanged uneasy glances, wondering which god had turned in his sleep. Then, one morning, the whispers became a roar. The horizon tore open. Thera exploded with the fury of 1,000 storms, unleashing a force hundreds of times more powerful than the atomic bomb. The sky turned black as night at midday. The sea, in a horrifying display, pulled back from the shore, only to return as a colossal tsunami. A pyroclastic flow wave of superheated gas, ash, and rock raced across the water at impossible speeds. It slammed into Crete's northern coast, incinerating everything in its path. In a single day, the island that had danced for centuries fell silent beneath a suffocating blanket of ash. Ships vanished into white foam. Harbors were choked with the debris of shattered homes. Inland, the sun disappeared for weeks. The once fertile fields turned grey and brittle, and the air filled with a dust that choked the cries of wandering livestock. The proud palaces, though not destroyed, seemed to hold their breath, wounded and stunned. No army could have inflicted such devastation. Only the earth itself could break a world this pure. But Crete did not die. The Minoan spirit, forged by the sea and the sun, was resilient. When the ash finally settled and the smoke cleared, they began again. With incredible determination, they scrubbed their courtyards, raised new columns, and painted new dolphins on their walls. They restored the palaces, making them even grander than before. A defiant statement against the heavens. Perhaps they believed they had defeated disaster through sheer will. Perhaps they thought the gods had tested them and found them worthy. But something fundamental had cracked. The sea they once ruled now felt haunted, unpredictable. The storm had broken their certainty, their unwavering belief in their own world. The psychological scar ran deeper than any fissure in the earth. In the years that followed, a subtle change crept over Crete. The unbridled joy that once radiated from their art began to fade. The dancing figures in the frescoes seemed a little stiffer, the colors a touch colder. The trauma of the eruption had left its mark, and into this vulnerable world, a new people began to arrive from across the water. They came from the Greek mainland, the Mycenaeans. They were different, taller, harder. carrying bronze weapons and speaking a different tongue. At first, they were traders, then guests, then something more. No one can pinpoint the exact moment the balance of power shifted. It happened gradually, like a changing tide. The old, undeciphered Minoan script, Linear A, began to fade from use. In its place, a new script appeared, Linear B, an early form of Greek. This was the language of inventories, of administration, of war. The palaces once presided over by priestesses now echoed with the heavy tread of soldiers' boots. The arenas where acrobats once leaped over charging bulls now rang with the shouts of military orders, not joyous celebration. The spirit of Crete was being overwritten, page by page. Still, the great palace of Knossos survived, a ghost of its former glory. Its labyrinthine corridors glowed red under lamplight. Its vast storerooms still held the wealth of a dying era. Scribes, even as new earthquakes cracked the walls around them, meticulously recorded shipments of oil, wool, and bronze as if imposing order on clay tablets could somehow hold back the tide of fate. But it couldn't. Then came the final, devastating blow. Fires. They erupted in palaces across the island Knossos. Molia, Zachras seemingly all at once. Were they the result of an internal rebellion, a final Mycenaean conquest, or simply an act of collective despair? We may never know for sure, but when the smoke cleared, the Crete of colour and grace was gone. Its grand courts lay black and silent. The air, once filled with the scent of sea salt and flowers, now smelled of smoke and endings. The Mycenaeans took what was left. They built on the ruins, adopted the Minoan sea routes, and copied their architectural columns and fresco styles. But it was a hollow imitation. They copied the form, but not the heart, not the soul that had once made Minoan art breathe. The original language of the island, with its songs, its laughter, and its sacred ceremonies, fell quiet like a tide that would never return. And yet, something of the Minoans endured. It survived not in stone, but in spirit. Their exquisite sense of harmony and proportion lived on, influencing Greek temples for centuries to come. Their stories were woven into the fabric of Greek mythology, tales of a wise King Minos, and a terrifying labyrinth of a bull-headed creature lost in the dark, and of a daring escape on wings made of wax and feathers. The memory of grace survived inside the shape of tragedy. Today, if you walk through the magnificent ruins of Knossos, you can still feel it. You can feel the sea on the wind and see the iconic red columns standing slender and defiant against the blue Cretan sky. They were painted long ago by hands that believed beauty could outlast fear. If you listen, really listen, past the noise of the modern world, the silence almost sings. It sings of a people who built a paradise without walls, who turned life itself into an art form, and who, even as their world turned to ash, never forgot how to begin again. The Minoans may be gone, but their whisper remains, a timeless lesson in resilience, beauty, and the enduring power of the human spirit. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey back in time. If you found this story as fascinating as we do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more explorations into the lost worlds of our past. We'll see you in the next one. High on the Anatolian plateau, where winter bites the stone and rivers freeze before dawn, another kind of civilization took shape. This wasn't a land of soft harbors or gentle fields. This was a land of rock, wind, and iron resolve. This was the land of the Hittites, a kingdom built on endurance and the absolute power of the written word. Their capital, Hattusa, stood like a clenched fist above the plains. Its walls ran for miles across ridges and valleys, its gates guarded by lions carved from single blocks of stone. The lions' eyes stared wide and calm, as if daring centuries to pass them by. They weren't just decorations, they were a statement that this city was built to last. Inside those gates lay a city of courtyards and archives, temples and granaries, all tied together by a single, powerful discipline. Record everything, remember everything, control everything. The Hittites believed that the written word could outlive kings, and they were right. In their archives, archaeologists found clay tablets stacked by the tens of thousands, each one pressed with intricate cuneiform wedges, each one telling a story of harvests, treaties, taxes, and even dreams. They recorded the weight of grain, the price of copper, the words of a queen. to her gods the prayers of a soldier before war, while other civilizations sang their power in monumental stone. The Hittites spoke theirs in silent, enduring clay. This wasn't just bookkeeping, it was an obsession with order. It was the foundation of their entire world. Their laws were stern, but remarkably measured for the time. They punished theft not with mutilation, but with restitution. They saw justice as a way to correct a wrong, not simply to exact vengeance. This level-headed approach extended to a place few ancient empires dared to go. They trusted women with genuine authority. Queens like the legendary Puduhepa signed international treaties right beside their husbands. They sealed official correspondence with foreign kings and ruled as high priestesses of the sun goddess. They weren't just royal wives, they were partners in power. To the Hittites, law wasn't a tool of fear, it was an act of faith. Faith in a stable, ordered society. In the temples of Hattusa, priests poured wine before hundreds of gods. The Hittites believed in a rich plurality of faith. They saw divinity everywhere, in every mountain, every storm, every neighboring people. So they became collectors of gods. Their pantheon was a vast parliament of spirits, a council of thunder, earth, and sky. When a new land was conquered, its gods weren't erased, they were adopted. For the Hittites, conquest was just diplomacy made permanent. Their power spread across the mountains of Anatolia and down into Syria. Following rivers of silver and roads of copper, caravans of donkeys climbed through narrow mountain passes, carrying metal and messages alike. To the east, they met the ancient lands of Babylon, and to the south, the mighty empire of Egypt. Between them lay a city called Kadesh, a place that would soon witness the meeting of two titans. The Hittite king, Muwatallitu, marched his army south, his chariots gleaming like fire under the sun. From the other direction, the proud young pharaoh, Ramses II, came north with equal ambition. The two greatest armies on earth met by the banks of the Orontes River. Dust rose like smoke between them. For a full day, the earth shook with the thunder of horses, the crash of wheels, and the shouted names of gods. But neither side yielded. By dusk, the field was littered with wreckage and a profound silence. There was no clear victor, only shared, brutal exhaustion. And from that exhaustion, something extraordinary emerged: wisdom. For the first time in recorded history, two great powers did what no one had done before. They chose to write peace. A treaty was forged, carved in silver, sealed in clay, and sworn before 1,000 gods of both lands. It promised a military alliance, the fair return of refugees, and eternal friendship between the two kings. A copy of that very treaty sits in the United Nations headquarters today, the oldest surviving document of international diplomacy known to humankind. It was a peace born of war, but made of law. At its height, Hattusa was a marvel. Its streets bustled with merchants from distant lands. Its temples still seemed to smell faintly of incense, and its palaces were cooled by the mountain air. Scribes worked through the night by oil lamps, chiseling memory into wet clay. In open fields, charioteers trained their horses to pivot at a single word, their wheels trimmed with bronze and prayer. The city was discipline made visible, a fortress of order against the chaos of the world. But no law, no matter how strong, can outlast the hunger of the earth. The climate shifted. The plateau grew colder. Harvests thinned. The caravans that were the lifeblood of the empire slowed as bandits began to prowl the roads. Enemies whispered at the borders. From the north, the wild Koska tribes slipped through mountain passes like wind through reeds. From the west, Mycenaean ships began to circle the coasts. The Hittite kings wrote more treaties and sent more gifts. But the world around them had already changed. Even their gods seemed to grow weary. The great storm deity, once their fiercest protector, fell silent in the prayers of kings. The tablets grew fewer, the handwriting more rushed. In the final years, the end came swiftly. Palaces burned. The great archives, filled with tens of thousands of tablets, collapsed under the weight of their own ash and fire. When archaeologists finally uncovered the ruins thousands of years later, they found entire rooms sealed by the intense heat, and inside they found the clay tablets, hardened into ceramic by the very blaze that destroyed the city. Destruction had become preservation. The empire that perished in flame left behind a voice that could not be silenced. The Hittites were gone, but their legacy remained treaty, code, equality, endurance. They proved that true strength doesn't need to shout, and that empires can be ruled by words just as effectively as by weapons. Their stone lions still guard the gates of their forgotten capital, their ancient treaty still speaks of peace, and the Anatolian plateau still remembers the echo of hooves in the winter wind. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten corners of history. We'll see you in the next one. Imagine an empire not built on sheer terror, but on treaties, diplomacy, and law. For 300 years, the Hittites mastered this delicate balance in the rugged heart of Anatolia. Their capital, Hattusa, was a fortress of stone and order, its archives filled with records of peace, its temples echoing with prayers to 1,000 gods. They were a Bronze Age superpower, a civilization that stood shoulder to shoulder with Egypt and Babylon. And then, one day, the sky fell silent. The rains simply stopped. At first, it must have felt like a test from their storm god, Tarhunt, a temporary trial of faith. The Hittites were a deeply religious people. They prayed. They lit sacred fires on mountaintops. They promised their gods richer offerings, grander festivals, anything to bring back the life-giving water. But the clouds remained stubbornly absent. Season after season, the sun beat down on a thirsty land. The great rivers that fed their kingdom, like the Kizilurmak, shrank to mere trickles. The vast forests fell quiet, and the once fertile fields of the central plateau cracked and turned to dust. The foundation of their world was crumbling. Wells dried up. The massive royal granaries, designed to store years of surplus, began to empty at an alarming rate. Soon, the crisis could no longer be contained within their borders. Caravans which once carried tin and copper now carried desperate pleas. We have clay tablets from these final years, letters from the Hittite kings to their allies along the coast. One, sent to Ugarit, is heartbreakingly direct. It's not a command from a great king to a vassal. It's a cry for help. Send us food, it reads, for we are dying of hunger. Famine achieved what no foreign army ever could. It broke the empire's spine. Bronze weapons are useless when the men who wield them are starving. International treaties lose their power when you have nothing left to trade. The meticulous scribes of Hattusa, ever dutiful, recorded the decline in their beautiful cuneiform script. Every wedge-shaped mark pressed into the clay was like a wound, each line a chronicle of a slow, agonizing surrender to the inevitable. An empire that ruled by the written word was now writing its own obituary. And as the empire weakened from within, predators began to circle. From the northern mountains, the fierce Koska tribes, perennial enemies of the Hittites, saw their chance. They swept down from the highlands, raiding villages, burning shrines, and disappearing back into the rugged terrain before the weakened Hittite army could respond. To the west, a powerful maritime people the Hittites called the Archaeology, whom many scholars identify as the Mycenaean Greeks of Homeric legend, began to test the borders, probing for weakness. To the south, in lands like Syria, vassal states that had long paid tribute to the great king in Hattusa began to whisper of rebellion. Why remain loyal to a power that could no longer protect them, or even feed itself? Inside the great city of Hattusa, the fires of loyalty were also beginning to flicker and die. The drought was soon joined by its grim companion, plague. Malnutrition devastated the population, leaving them vulnerable to diseases that swept through the cities and towns. The guards, who were supposed to protect every corner of the land, seemed to have abandoned their people entirely. The royal line itself became unstable. King after king died, often without a clear successor, leading to internal power struggles at the worst possible time. The throne of the great king, once the most powerful seat in the Near East, became a cursed chalice, a burden no man could carry for long. In the final, desperate years, a radical decision was made. The royal court would abandon the dry, dying heartland. They would move south to a city called Tarhuntassa in a region that was hopefully warmer, wetter, and closer to the remaining food sources along the coast. It was meant to be a new beginning, a second heart for a dying empire. But it was too little too late. The pulse of the kingdom had already slowed to a crawl. The move only fractured the remaining political unity, accelerating the collapse. The end, when it came, was swift and violent. The great city of Hattusa, once home to tens of thousands, was consumed by fire. We still don't know for sure who lit the match. Was it an invading enemy, a final, triumphant raid by the Costco or the mysterious sea peoples? Or was it an act of internal despair, a city tearing itself apart in its final moments? Palaces collapsed into their own archives. Temples fell. The empty granaries were turned to ash. The empire that had endured for centuries vanished from history. And yet, in that final, fiery destruction, something miraculous happened. The intense heat of the inferno that destroyed Hattusa baked the clay tablets in the royal archives, firing them like pottery. The flames that consumed the empire also immortalized its voice. The administrative records, the diplomatic letters, the religious texts, the desperate pleas for grain, they were all preserved, waiting for 3,000 years in the silent earth. The fall of the Hittites was not the end of their story, but a transformation. Across the mountains, small city-states rose from the ashes. We call them the Neo-Hittites. They were keepers of a fragmented memory, echoes of a lost greatness. They still carved their gods onto rock faces and wrote in a script derived from their ancestors, but they were flickers of light where once there had been a blazing sun. And over the next few centuries, even those lights slowly faded, absorbed into the rising empires of Assyria and Babylon. The Hittite story is a powerful reminder that even the greatest civilizations are fragile. It didn't end with a single, dramatic battlefield defeat, but with a slow, grinding fade. The treaties stopped being written. The gods stopped being honored. The last gate of the great city was left open, and the wind and weeds reclaimed what was once the center of the world. When archaeologists rediscovered Hattusa in the early 20th century, they found a profound silence sealed in magnificent beauty. They found the iconic Lion Gate, its guardian still staring down an empty road. They found walls that were still strong, but no longer had anything to protect. And they found tens of thousands of clay tablets, all whispering the same timeless truth, that even the most sophisticated laws and the mightiest armies are meaningless when the very climate that sustains you turns against you. But the Hittites left us more than just ruins and a cautionary tale. They left a legacy of ideas. That power should be bound by law and principle. That peace can be a deliberate act of diplomacy, and that a people's memory can outlive its empire. They showed us that civilization isn't about creating a world without chaos, but about having the courage to maintain order, to keep writing, and to keep faith, even when the sky itself refuses to listen. And so in the cold winds that sweep across the Anatolian plateau between the ancient stones, you can still hear the echo, a whisper of law, a plea to the heavens, and a quiet, patient story of a people who tried to hold their world together while it was falling apart. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the lost worlds of history. Let me know in the comments which ancient civilization you'd like to explore next. Until then, stay curious. Before steel empires carved up the world, before maps had clear-cut edges, 3 lights burned brightly in the ancient world. They never met, yet their stories echo each other different lands, but the same deep desire to transform wilderness into memory, to teach the earth to remember its creators. These were the Olmec, the Nabateans, and the Maya 3 civilizations that built breathtaking beauty, where logic said nothing could survive. In the steaming jungles of the Gulf Coast, where rivers tangled like roots and rain fell as if the sky itself were breaking, the first great civilization of the Americas took shape. The Olmec rose where others would have drowned. They sculpted the swamps into platforms, raising entire cities from water and sheer will. Their hands shaped clay into order, terraces, drains, causeways, and at their heart, massive plazas that glistened after every storm. They built San Lorenzo, then La Venta cities without walls, but with earthen pyramids so vast they looked like man-made mountains. Beneath these pyramids, they buried intricate mosaics of jade and serpentine, not for the living, but for the gods below. They turned the very ground into a shrine. Their rulers wore the faces of thunder. From volcanic basalt, they carved colossal heads, each a unique portrait, each as heavy as memory itself. Their features were calm, their helmets regal. These were not gods, but men who had become myths. Through trade and tribute, They stitched the jungles to the mountains, bringing jade from Guatemala, obsidian from Oaxaca, and shells from distant seas. Every road led back to the swamps, to the lowlands where the rain never stopped, and yet life had never been so ordered. They gave the world its first compass, its first hieroglyphs, its first taste of divine kingship in the Americas. And then, quietly, they passed. San Lorenzo fell, La Venta rose to replace it. Then La Venta fell, and new cities emerged. Their temples were sealed, their thrones buried, not destroyed, but retired. It was as if the Olmec themselves had stepped aside, to make room for the children of their own imagination, the Zapotec, the Maya, the Aztec. Each became a new verse written in the echo of the first. Far across the world, in a land of blazing wind and blood-orange rock, another light burned. The Nabateans, born from desert caravans, learned to command the uncommandable, water. They lived where the sun kills careless men before noon, yet they built a city of lush gardens and flowing fountains. This was petricarved straight from rose-red cliffs, a cathedral of stone that glowed like fire at sunset. They mastered every trick the desert could teach them, cisterns carved into hidden hillsides, channels cut to trap flash floods, pipes that carried precious life through canyons where no river dared to flow. They built their capital not against nature, but in partnership with it. Caravans from 1,000 miles away came to rest at Petra's gates. They brought frankincense from Arabia, pearls from the Gulf, spices from India, and silks from China. The Nabateans essentially taxed the desert, turning emptiness into an empire. And because they had mastered water, they had mastered life itself. Their temples were carved, not built, their facades a stunning dialogue between wind and chisel. Columns rose straight from the living rock, statues watched over the canyon with eternal patience. At night, lamps would flicker along the narrow gorge known as the Sick, and the air would smell of myrrh and copper. It was a city of stone, yet it was alive with song. When Rome arrived, Petra did not fall, it joined. Trade continued and wealth flowed. But everything changed when sea routes replaced the old desert roads. The caravans stopped coming. The pipes went dry. The fountains whispered themselves empty. And Petra returned to the profound silence from which it had been carved. Today, the sun still sets on its rose-red walls, and when it does, you can see what the Nabateans saw, the glory of impermanence, a beauty carved to outlast even the memory of its makers. And in the green heart of the world, beneath a canopy of endless leaves, the Maya built cities that touched the stars. They rose not beside rivers, but deep inside forests, stone mountains grown by human hands. Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque, Copan, each a powerful kingdom, each a cosmic clock that measured the rhythm of gods and men. They mapped the heavens, watched the sun crawl across the sky like a serpent of light, and recorded its journey in glyphs as intricate as lace. Their calendars reached backward and forward across millennia. To them, time was a liver being to be courted, feared, and understood. Their kings would bleed to keep that sacred covenant, drawing their own blood to feed the gods. Their cities thrived on ritual, on architecture perfectly aligned with the sunrise and eclipses. They built grand ball courts where winners were said to join the divine, and temples painted in blues so bright they seemed to defy time itself. Even their writing was artworks carved with such precision they still pulse with meaning today. For centuries, the Maya ruled their forest empire. But then the rains betrayed them. Drought crept like a shadow across the land. Fields cracked, reservoirs dried up, and war followed thirst. One by one, the great cities emptied, not destroyed, but abandoned, left like old gods gone to sleep. But the people did not vanish. They moved north to the Yucatan, to smaller towns and quieter lives. Their language endured. Their calendar endured. Their faith endured. Even now, millions still speak the words of the Maya. The forest reclaimed their cities, but not their spirit. So ends our journey through these ancient worlds. Every civilization believed it had mastered forever, and every one of them was wrong. But in that shared failure lies something greater, continuity, because nothing they built was ever truly wasted. Each ruin was a lesson. Each silence was a seed. They showed us how to build, how to remember, and how to start again. When you stand in a modern city and look down at the grid of the streets, you can still feel them beneath your feet, the planners of the Indus, the traders of Petra, the astronomers of the Maya. Their hands shaped the very idea of civilization itself. And maybe that's the real truth of history, not that empires fall, but that they fold into one another, becoming memory, becoming a blueprint, becoming us. Close your eyes. Listen. You can still hear the grind of grain on stone, the splash of water in a public bath, the strike of a chisel on marble, the whisper of a scribe pressing words into clay. It's the rhythm of a city breathing, then pausing, then starting all over again. Civilization never dies. It only changes its voice. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more explorations into our shared past. See you next time.